Welcome back to the Cordell Cordell and Men's Divorce Podcast. I'm Scott Trout, Managing Partner and CEO of Cordell Cordell, and we continue to bring you information for guys before, during, and after divorce and everything related to family law and in between. We've been doing that for the last 20 months and we'll continue to do so. And if you haven't yet subscribed, you want to subscribe to this podcast. We do it twice each week, and you'll get notified of a new episode as we go. And for 10 to 15 minutes, we're just going to talk about spot issues we know that interest you and affect you. Perhaps you're in the middle of a case, thinking about it, or at the tail end. There's always something of interest. And I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. It's full of our virtual town halls as well as these podcasts. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in the virtual town hall, I encourage you to go to cordellcordell.com, check more out. We have one coming up here in July. It's an opportunity to attend and listen to a panel of Cordell and Cordell attorneys. It is free, but you just have to register. You can log in and register and make sure you can ask questions live and get answers right then and right there from the panel of Cordell and Cordell attorneys. So if you have questions, give us a call at 866-DADS-LAW or go to the website at cordellcordell.com. So today in our podcast, it's no different. Keep in mind, it's not an attorney-client relationship. We just can't give you advice. We want to do that in an initial consultation. You can schedule those, as I always mention, by giving us a call at 866-DADS-LAW. So today, we're joined from another one of our attorneys in Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for joining. And today we're going to talk about a topic dealing with paternity actions. And oftentimes, yesterday we were talking about in our podcast how as lawyers, we throw these words around and we just, because we know them, and it's often misunderstood. What is a paternity and what is a child support proceeding? What does it mean? Some states say father-child relationship or establishment, or there's just all these different terms. And what does it really mean? So we thought today, I thought it was a good idea to spend a little bit breaking it down. And the best place to start is, what are these two things? What do they mean? So guys know what we're talking about.
Well, in Florida, a child support action, for instance, is where a father can establish, paternity can be established in a child support action if the parties are not married, and they'll also set a child support obligation from one party to the other. Whereas in a paternity action, when the parties are not married, this action will establish paternity, i.e., are you the father of these children or child? Establish visitation, we call it time sharing here in Florida, along with child support. So in paternity actions, you can get all three, whereas in child support, you just get that one.
Yeah, it can be really confusing and maybe shocking is the word, because I've met with a lot of guys who are not married and there's a child, and I talk to them about, hey, one can happen without the other. You could be served with a child support proceeding and have no rights whatsoever other than to be, and I know this is blunt, but you're an ATM machine. You're basically a money dispensary, and that's it. That's all the rights you have, right?
Exactly. With child support, again, all you're establishing is an obligation to support. Mom can still withhold. You have no decision-making authority. You don't have to be on their emergency contact, for instance, for school. All you are doing is establishing an obligation, a responsibility, and no rights.
On the sworn affidavit that you're the father with no real genetic proof, at least in Missouri, we can have a mom go and say, I'm the father, get a child support established if I do nothing to challenge, that I am actually the biological father, and you now are paying child support. And it's very shocking for guys that like, what are you talking about? Now I'm on the hook. The state has maybe instituted an action, and mom gets free legal services. It's just a very difficult time to kind of get your mind around this process. And then let's talk about having no rights. And when I mean no rights, if there's no paternity, let's talk about that. What do no rights mean?
No rights means if mom says you're not getting the child, you're not getting the child. If mom wants to, for instance, I've had a case where dad didn't want the child on like Ritalin and, like behavioral medication. Dad had no say in it. Dad couldn't even pick up the child at school, couldn't be registered on the daycare slip, no decision-making authority. And that's what it comes down to. If mom says you can, hey, come over, you can have the child for half the day, and she gets upset for some reason, and decides, hey, I'm going to call the police and say I never gave you permission, the police officer is going to show up to your house and take the child. It doesn't matter that you say I'm the dad. You have no legal paperwork to prove that paternity or your rights have been established. Because again, in Florida, if you have a child out of wedlock, there's no rights there.
Yeah, I mean, and it starts. I mean, there's so many variables to consider. I've met with guys who their girlfriend is pregnant and they want to do something now, which you can't until the birth of the child because you can't establish paternity. And they say they're being denied access to the birthing, to the doctor appointments, and it is rather. I mean, I would say it's disturbing. I mean, let's say you want to be a part. I mean, that's the first key. You want to be a part of this child's life, and maybe mom wants you to be, but you get in an argument. She can just ignore you without repercussion. I mean, honestly, they can pick up and move and relocate to another state. I've had that without repercussion until you take the affirmative steps of filing a paternity action. And that is something where we talk about a lot about, not sitting on your rights and doing that, because there is that distinct difference between, and they are together and somewhat wrapped, but you can do one without the other. Obviously, if you're a guy and you seek paternity, you would expect child support at some point to be part of that, right?
Exactly. Like I said, like in paternity actions, you can have established child support, you establish your rights, responsibility, and a time sharing plan or visitation plan. So like if mom, for instance, now goes ahead and says, we have a legal paperwork that says dad gets every other weekend. And mom gets upset and says, hey, I don't want you to have our son or our daughter this weekend. It doesn't work that way. You have a legal binding document that you can call once you go and pick up the child from school or wherever. You can call, your local police or the authorities and say, hey, this is the document, this is the final judgment that's giving me time sharing this weekend. And the police are, the officer will likely say, okay, mom, you don't have a choice. This is his weekend. He's supposed to have his child. More so if mom is withholding, you can file a contempt action against her and you have repercussions because you've established those rights. And you've in a paternity action, you can also motion that we do a paternity test to ensure that this child is yours, which is key too, because you don't want to go 11, 12 years thinking one thing. And then, it's heartbreaking on many levels for that to happen.
Yeah, and the question always comes out, hey, I'm on the birth certificate. She put my name on it as a father. Aren't I the father? And, that is a presumption. It's used as evidence. And there's such a thing called the putative father registry, too, where you can take action to list yourself as the father of this child to make sure that there's no other proceedings. And that's hugely important. I encourage guys to research the putative father registry as well. But it's shocking where I've had guys come in and been paying child support for years, and all of a sudden things go badly. There was never a court-instituted finding of parentage, and now mom has either disappeared, stopped, communicating, and they're just stunned that they have no rights. And so it is trying to get this word. That's why I thought this was a really interesting topic, to get that out there, that you really have to take action, and it doesn't have to be something that's litigated and high conflict, and, just establish it. And let's just set some ground rules for everyone. I always put it this way. You're not just trying to establish a schedule for you. The way you say it is, look, let's just protect each other. I can't leave. You can't leave. I can't deny you. You can't deny me. It's equal. Our rights, we're just setting them out. And that's always a good thing.
Oh yeah. And I always tell my clients, it's best to do it when, earlier on in the relationship, once when the child is first born, everybody seems to be getting along. Let's just iron out this detail. And it doesn't have to be contentious, like you said. We can just, file the petition. We can do what we call a consent final in Florida or Jacksonville specifically, but you can come up with an agreement and you guys are the masters of rearing your child together, which is what it's really ideally supposed to be. But again, and there's serious consequences to not doing that. You can walk in here and say, I want to put myself on child support, and we have to stop at the gate and say, No, you don't. You want to, file a paternity action because child support carries serious consequences.
Right.
So,
So talk about the child support, because there's so many guys from all around the country listening, and it's calculated in so many different variables, at least in Florida. Talk about how child support is calculated and established in Florida.
okay, so child support is calculated in Florida based on the combined incomes of the parties, the expense of the child, daycare cost, healthcare, things like that, and then the number of overnights. And that, I want to put a pin in that because that's very important. If you don't have any overnight time sharing established with the child, then you're going to get 0 overnights or credits, because the idea with that is when the child is with you, you're exerting funds, you're spending money. If you don't have a court order or some type of agreement certified by the court saying that you're going to get 146 overnights, which is pretty, the standard, then you're going to be paying a lot more in child support.
Yeah, Missouri has the same thing. We call it a line 11 adjustment. The more overnights, the better. And I think historically, and it is a challenge for paternity cases, I think it's more difficult to get more time when you're not married, and it's just this kind of unconscious bias that sits around in the on the bench, where you're like, well, and I tend to see courts being more restrictive on younger, what we call an infant schedule. And it's a challenge, but you really need to set that standard, try to get as much time as you can. And it's not necessarily financially driven, but the theory being is the more time you have, the more expenses you have. So you just need to make sure you're doing that. That's so important. And just yesterday in our podcast, or our last podcast, we talked about legal custody. And that's so equally important, and more important maybe even for paternity cases, where you just really outline, and I'm curious your thoughts on the rights to make decisions, the major healthcare, education, and welfare decisions for the child. And that's just, I think, so important for paternity cases.
Yes, and that's one of the rights that we establish in paternity cases. But in Florida, for instance, well, in Jacksonville, I want to say in Jacksonville in particular, we have guidelines. So there's a presumption of, because I think the courts are trying to get away from that bias that we've had in the past, right? So in Florida, we have 146, in Jacksonville, we have 146 overnights, which calculates out to about every other weekend and 1 night per week, which is meaningful contact with the child. But with the rights, we usually generally do shared parental rights and responsibility, which is equal decision-making authority. So you guys, the parents confer, and they make decisions on the child. Now, if the parties cannot agree when it comes to, for instance, education or health and things like that, we can ask and request in our petition ultimate decision-making authority if the parties cannot agree. So if we've reached an impasse and a decision has to be made, you can petition for that.
So as we get close to kind of the end of our topic, the one thing I think, a word of caution, is to do your part as a dad. And that is, sometimes you're thinking, I don't want to pay the child support. I'm not going to pay the child support. But there are consequences that if you don't pay, things that what we call there's a look back period, at least in Missouri, if you're not paying, where the courts can look back at birthing expenses and cost of, and then hit you with a big lump sum. But more importantly, there's contempt. You can lose your license. You can get your tax return intercepted. All these consequences.
Yes, and same thing in Florida. We have a look back period of 24 months from the date of filing. So you're on the hook. Say the court, say the Department of Revenue takes an action against you. Because if mom files for any need-based request, they can take an action against you too. They can look back up to 24 months from the date of filing the petition. So, and that gets added to the child support going forward. So the child could be 18 and you're still paying child support because you still have an arrears.
Yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize, look, it's about having a consultation with an attorney to develop a strategy. Maybe you don't want to move forward now, but let's put yourself in a really good position. That is, let's determine what you can and should pay, at least pay something. Let's keep good records of the kind of time overnights that you're getting, so that when you do proceed, you have a good, a historical schedule, and it's not he said, she said. It's, recollection recorded, and, it's contemporaneous with what's going on. But I think that's just know your rights and know what you're giving up by not proceeding now. And that's just hugely important. So thanks for joining today. Great topic, really good information. Just emphasizes the need to hire an attorney that just practices exclusive and domestic relations. So thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So topics just like this, keep tuning in. If you subscribe, whether it's Apple iTunes or otherwise, you'll get alerted every time we drop a new podcast. Great stuff. Take 10 minutes of your day, have a listen. You're going to find a topic that interests you, that applies to you. Kind of put yourselves in the shoes of us. And as we're describing this, it's very informative and educational. We want you to use this to spur questions and conversations with an attorney, as I said, who practices exclusively in this area like we do at Cordell and Cordell. Check us out on the website, CordellCordell.com. Again, check out our YouTube channel. And more importantly, check out the virtual town hall coming up in July. It's going to be great. It's the 5 things guys must consider when facing divorce. It's kind of a takeoff on our 10 stupidest mistakes guys make when facing divorce. So we want to give you some proactive steps. It's free. You just got to register, and you can get your questions answered by the panel of Cordell and Cordell attorneys. Give us a call, 866-DADS-LAW. Until next time, have a great week.